I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Gary McKinnon, who made international headlines in 2002 after being accused by the United States government of perpetrating the biggest military computer hack of all time. McKinnon maintains that he was merely looking for evidence of free energy suppression and a cover-up of UFO activity, and has described seeing evidence of this inside government computer systems. He joins us today to take a look back at what happened 20 years ago and how his life has changed since those events. So, Gary, welcome, sir. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, I realize there are topics that you may not feel comfortable talking about. So I wanted to start by saying, if I broach any of those, please let me know. Let me begin by asking how and what you're doing these days. Where are you at in life right now?
Okay, hi Tim, and thanks for the intro. I love your channels, by the way, so salute in that regard.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yep, these days I've been running my own business since 2014, doing search engine optimization, getting people's websites high up in Google for their products or services. So yeah, that's the main thing I've been focused on.
Okay. Well, so for the audience sake, you were accused by the U.S. government of hacking into what they claim were 97 U.S. military and NASA computers over a 13-month period between February 2001 and March 2002. So can I ask, what is your side of that story? Because I know that, again, prosecutors are prone to inflating things when they can.
Yeah, I mean, I've been full and frank from the beginning, since the first arrest in March, whatever it was that year. I knew that everything I'd done was on my computer. I had the lists, I had my scan tools. So to have lied, would have just been silly, because once they just done the forensic analysis, they would have seen, well, actually, you were in these systems, etc., etc. So I did always admit what I'd done, but the main thing came to the so-called damage, or depending on your definition of damage. It turned out that to be worth 1 year in prison in the US, it had to be a computer offense that was to be extraditable. You had to have caused at least $5,000 worth of damage, and they were saying that I'd caused exactly $5,000 worth of damage on every machine I'd been on, which is obviously ridiculous, because my whole modus operandi was getting on the network, getting onto a machine, getting onto other machines, and finding my way through and finding interesting stuff. And in fact, even when it came time for, in America, you have the DOJ, the Department of Justice. In England, we have the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. And they asked the DOJ, well, okay, you're going for extradition now, so we need serious evidence of his damage. And they had none. I've got 2 documents I can easily link you to that say the so-called American evidence, or DOJ evidence, because they don't represent all Americans, because most Americans believe in UFOs. In fact, they're extraterrestrial, at least some are in origin. Yeah, they said it was hearsay. Basically, there was no evidence of damage. So I think back then, I don't know what it is now, but the General Accounting Office said that DoD systems suffered, something like 250,000 attempted hacks entries every year, 250,000 every year. And a lot of them more successful than me, done by people far cleverer than me that can, code TCP/IP, TCP/IP, and do really detailed stuff, fragmented packets and the like. I was just doing what was basically password cracking, blank password scanning. So when they say, it was damage that he did, obviously they have to temporarily disable the systems and scan them, but I wasn't vandalistic at all. But it was the accusations of damage which turned this into a nearly 11-year court battle, rather than any actual damage. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been extraditable. And I would have served, I think it was 6 months in prison at the time under the Computer Misuse Act in Britain.
Yeah. Well, as I understand things, the U.S. government tried very hard to extradite.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. I've got a got a bit of the man flu at the moment. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
Mm.
So yeah, they tried very hard to extradite you back to the USA in order to prosecute you. And if I understand correctly, they eventually gave up after then Home Secretary Theresa May blocked it due to your medical conditions. So is there anything you can share about this extradition process and how that was eventually blocked?
Yeah, well, it was strange because we, Britain and the USA already had an existing extradition treaty. But I think it was from the 70s or something. And yeah, it didn't really cover cybercrime. And we saw the first draft of the new extradition treaty, the 2006 UK-US extradition treaty. And it was all in American spelling, so it did seem kind of one-sided. And B, it did seem to craft in a lot of the phrases that were used in their allegations against me. And I think it was a time when they were sick of cyber intrusions, obviously being the military. No one had really been punished or publicly punished, served a long sentence, a very long sentence, because I was facing 70 years at that time. So I did feel like a bit of a poster boy when it turned from 6 months into a UK jail, which would have been 3 months after good behaviour, to suddenly facing 70 years in a foreign jail, an American jail.
Yeah.
It was a huge jump. So I definitely think I was being used as something to, discourage others from going the same route.
Well, that does make sense. And I think that I mean, there's been really overwhelming public support for your case. So I think that the general public probably felt the same way. You had over 80 ministers of parliament sign an early day motion on your behalf. There was a benefit concert that was planned to help support you. And that had a veritable list. It was like the who's who of British music celebrities who'd signed on for that. And then you've had public offers to support your legal costs from a number of wealthy UK entrepreneurs. So, I mean, those are just a few of the ways. You could probably name several others. What are some of the ways that you've seen that have kind of helped emotionally support you in terms of this public support?
Oh, wow. Yeah, there was a lot of support. People that were heroes from my past, like bands like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Pink Floyd, Chrissie Hynde from the Pretenders. We did a single, and I actually got to meet Chrissie Hynde, which was impressive. I didn't get to meet anyone from Pink Floyd or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, unfortunately, or Crosby, Stills and Nash, as they now have been for a while. But yeah, that was really amazing. It was, we didn't take any money from anyone, I don't think. My parents had to remortgage the house at one point. But for me, myself, I was on legal aid as an individual. And in Britain, legal aid is something that used to be an individual could have great legal aid when he or she was fighting a corporation or government. Those laws have since been changed. And legal aid is very difficult to get if you're an individual fighting a larger entity. But yeah, that side, there was a lot of support, especially from the Daily Mail, the newspaper that ran a campaign. And yeah, I'll forever be grateful for that. It's quite an amazing moment seeing Crosby, Stills and Nash. There was no sort of concert formed for me. I think there was talk of that, but it never occurred. But it was great seeing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young sort of mention my name on stage. And hey, this is about a young guy. I don't know why they say young guy. I was 36. A young guy in Britain who's just looking for UFOs. And so it was weird. At first, it was kind of exciting, all of this, before we realized that it could be 70 years. There was a few months of, doing press and interviews and thinking, it'd just be a short-term jail sentence. Then the extradition threat came in, and then we had to build up publicity and try and look for support, because that's the only thing will save you in a situation like this is public support. But it can take years to garner. So yeah, it was a long time getting to that point, but there was a lot of celebrities supporting and stuff. And as for the early day motion, yeah, I salute those people that signed it. But there were a lot more that didn't, because of course, politicians are self-serving careerists. It's not really about the issues. It's about how it affects their career and gets them where they want to be, which might be a good thing at the end, because maybe by the time they've got to where they want to be, maybe by being a bit negative to some people along the way, then maybe then they can do some good. So you can't blame them for being political animals. But yeah, so there was a lot of support, but there was also a lot of negativity as well.
Now, are you able to talk a little bit about some of the negativity?
Oh yeah. I don't know what you or your viewers' opinion is in governments, but as I see them, governments aren't the people that get things done. What we have are the permanent underlying institutions to government. In America, the Department of Justice. In Britain, the Crown Prosecution Service. In Britain, we also have the Foreign Office, the Home Office, your intelligence services, your military. So to my mind, after 56 years on this planet, the government are just puppets. They're front men for a band,
Yeah.
And the organizer are these permanent institutions, because in Britain, for instance, these people are in these positions, very important positions, for a decade or 2 decades or more. And they're unelected, they're all public school boys in this country in the main. So there's no real connection with the people. And I've found that whatever government's in, whether it's left or right, Democrat, Republic, whatever, the same issues keep being propagated. And that's what the state wants, what the intel establishment want. Well, I guess the military industrial complex, to use a classic phrase, wants. And that's the agenda that keeps getting furthest, regardless of who's in power. So I think I digress a bit.
No. That's and actually, I want to come back to this. I had a few questions later on that I want to get to about trust in government, right? Because I think that's at the crux of so many major social issues in Western civilization in general, right? But especially in the United States right now. But one thing I wanted to touch on was, you mentioned Crosby, Stills, and Nash talking about UFOs. I think one of the things that complicates your story a little bit is, you'd mentioned all of these attempted hacks that happen, right? You've got people from, Russia or China looking for defense secrets so that they can, steal our latest jet fighter. You've got other people who are trying to access bank accounts to steal money. In your case, you had the motivation of trying to find evidence for UFOs, anti-gravity technology, and the suppression of free energy. And the inspiration from that came from the Disclosure Project statement at the Washington Press Club back in May 2001. I actually remember that statement. And what they did was lay out a roadmap. They said, look, the government has secrets. They're not sharing them with the people. They're hidden, and so yeah, I could absolutely see how that would inspire you. Can you tell me a little bit about how you were inspired, I guess, when you got started there?
Yeah, big time. As you just mentioned, the Disclosure Project and their book, Disclosure, Stephen Greer. Best thing he's ever done. I mean, CU5 Contact, that's very much on the sort of consciousness level of things. There's a totally different reader from Physical Proof. But yeah, I mean, he got, I think it was over 400 witnesses that have now been, publicly shown, in whether it be in videos or written statements. And I think at least double that in secret, and perhaps there's more to come, also is intimated. And that Disclosure Project, but because, so you've got to picture who I was and where I was. I was a guy, I was into science fiction, one of those guys into space and the mysteries and stuff. And the UFO phenomena was the best of all. It was the best thing to be interested in, as far as I was concerned, because if we could, I wasn't so much interested in meeting aliens, although that'd be great and weird, but amazing. I wanted to know how the propulsion worked and how the energy worked. Those are the main things for me, because then you could have more of an egalitarian society. I mean, free energy, then no one's at the bottom, are they, if you have that? But unfortunately, I never found anything about free energy. But what I thought, my thinking was, I need to know where to go. I've got some networking skills just from being like a Windows contractor for a few years at the time. And actually, no, I was 36, wasn't I? So more than a few years. But so I've got Windows networking skills, a bit of Unix, general computing knowledge, and this thirst for the UFO knowledge. So I thought I really want to go to the horse's mouth. And I wasn't thinking, straight to the source. I wasn't thinking about, personal cost or the cost of my family if I got caught, or it was quite an airheady thing to do at the time, I suppose. And they say it's part of Asperger's, which I was diagnosed with, just going on these ridiculous crusades where it just, completely takes up all your time and attention. And in the Disclosure Project book, it was so rich with locations and, names of bases, areas, institutions that are all involved in the UFO subject in one way or another. And one of the best things they had was Donna Hare. Excuse me, hopefully. Donna Hare was a photographic specialist at NASA, and she had, I think, secret clearance because she took what they call mission slides and launch slides, so very close-up footage and photographs of the rocketry and all the telemetry and electronics that's involved and whatever. And so she had to be, classified as secret. And she said that when she was in, not only did she say it was Johnson Space Center, NASA JSC, she said it was in Building 8. So then you knew which building she was in. And she said, and this sounded quite lackadaisical, but across the corridor from her was another colleague who invited her across the corridor to his lab or room or whatever and said, Donna, look at this. And he showed her a high-res satellite photograph. And floating above the terrain was this, circular disc with a shadow. And Donna said that all she noticed at first was the shadow on the trees. I think it was close enough satellite photography to make out that it was trees the shadow was on. And Donna being a photographic expert and this being analog photography, she said, oh, is it a blur in the emulsion? Because of the way they used to develop old photographs, you could make marks on the emulsion as the photo's developing and, change things. And the guy said, well, no, look, he said, look at the big silver disc. He said, that's the shadow of something, in the sky, so far above these trees. And to kind of summarize that, Donna said that basically the room she was working in was right opposite a room that was airbrushing out satellite images that contained UFOs, flying saucers, in the photograph. So I thought, whoa, this is gold dust. And I was already in JSC, Johnson Space Center. And there's certain commands you can do in Windows because all my hacks were on Windows. Well, most of my hacks were on Windows. And you can run a command, netstack command, that shows you all the computers on the network. And they use it for auditing. So they have comment fields. And they can use it for serial numbers, year of purchase, all for standard computer auditing. And thankfully, NASA are very good at that because they left a lot of detail in these comment fields. And one of the details was the location of the PC, and Building 8 was mentioned. So I wrote a small script to strip out all the Building 8 machines from the netstat output. And there were less than a dozen, if I remember rightly. And one of the first ones I jumped on had a blank administrator password, which was my technique. It was password cracking. It wasn't clever hacking. None of this was to do with me being a computer genius. It was more to do with the networks having lack security. And bear in mind, to be fair to the armed services, that's because they generally at that time on these networks weren't employing IT professionals. They were just either training up existing Army, Navy, NASA, Air Force, whatever staff, or using existing staff that already had a talent for computers. So, the security wasn't best. And so I got into the Building 8 machines. And I don't know if it was the first one I looked at, but it was the first one that had folders on the desktop, very blank desktop. Most workers have shortcuts and folders and stuff everywhere on the desktops. And it was called raw unprocessed or unprocessed and processed or whatever. And that was number one, because that's what Donna Hare said. They're processed and they're unprocessed. They're airbrushing out to use the old technology. I don't know if they did it digitally and then, re-enhanced the new image, or if they did it with an actual airbrush. I can't remember what year Donna said she saw this in. But what I saw was digital. Whether or not they, print off from the digital and then do the airbrushing physically and then scan that back into digital, I don't know. But these were large files. There was lots of them in this folder, this unprocessed folder, which is obviously where the good stuff is because they're not blotted out yet. But yeah, very large, like 200, 250 megabytes plus. And I was on 56K dial-up, which is about 5 minutes per megabyte, whereas now you get like 10 megabytes per second. So to download this to my machine would have taken ages. So I wanted to view it on the desktop. And also it turned out it was in a NASA proprietary format. It wasn't like a JPEG or a PNG or whatever. So you needed their software to view the image. So I just double clicked it on the desktop and the proprietary software, the linked application opened up. But at that time, I think I was on 1024 by 768 resolution. And because of the slow link, and I think I was, full color for that time, which probably would have been 16-bit for 1024. It was very slow coming down. This was a Java application. It wasn't like a 50 times a second refresh. It would fetch a line, come back, slowly build up the picture. So I turned down to 640, 480, I think, or maybe 320 by 240, and either 4-bit color or 2-bit color. And it started to come down more quickly then. It looked like, it'd be like 5-10 minutes before I could see the whole thing. And what I saw was at first darkness, and then this gradually lightening, hemisphere curvature. And then what was obviously an atmosphere and the atmosphere edge line around the planet. And then you saw like landmass, cloud, and then this thing started to appear. At first, just straight white lines glowing, then getting brighter because of the specular highlights, wherever the light source was. And it was about 2/3 down, and you could see it was a clearly tubular object, pretty much like tic-tac-toe or the classic cigar-shaped objects. But the only difference this had was it had domes. And okay, it was low resolution. It was a bit jaggedy to look at, but it looked to me like the sort of geodesic domes you see in military radar. We've got some at Menwith Hill here. Oh, excuse me, mouth flu. And it was my eureka moment. It was my bloody God. I mean, I already believed Donna Hare, very serious woman, years in the industry, great connections and qualifications. But to actually go there into the building, she said, one of the rooms, well, one of the PCs that she said, and find this craft that was inexplicable. It wasn't human or earth-based, or there were no rivets, no seams. It was very smooth, admittedly low resolution, hard to make out bits and pieces, but yeah, it looked really alien. There was no propulsion holes or jets or rocket cones or anything like that. So yeah, Donna Hare was a real legend there. She was good stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really interesting also, because a lot of the folks who have focused on your story have focused on what you've seen, right? The cigar-shaped craft, and then there was also a spreadsheet, if I remember that correctly. But it is interesting. You're making a really important point that your inspiration was Donna O'Hare, and she described all of these things. You confirmed at least part of that, right? Now, in her case, I mean, if she was going to make up a story, she could say anything she wants. So to be able to go in and confirm major parts of that, right? Processed, unprocessed, it's going to be in this building, on these machines.
Yeah.
There, you saw part of what she said. So it sounds like, in general, the public should probably give her story more credibility.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, to me, that's the biggest story ever. A, because she's so credible, and B, because having personally confirmed it, it's just, it's just a mind blow. It's like, my God, it was actually, because there's so much misinformation and disinformation in this field. Well, as there are many. I really wanted to get that feeling of personal conviction. Now I know I don't just believe or suspect or make an educated guess based on a lot of evidence that may not necessarily be proof in totality, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, how do you feel like public perception is changing? And the reason I mention that is, so I think it's one thing to know yourself, right? To say, I know that this is real, but then the general public, for many years, the general public, I'm sure a good percentage were saying, you know what, it's just, this isn't real. It's a fantasy, until the Nimitz encounters and the UAP videos and the congressional investigation, and now there is yet another investigation, right? I don't even remember the acronym they're using for this one. So, this was something. UFOs were a fantasy for so many years. They weren't real. There's no possible way that this could exist. It's just something out of the movies, and now they are. It appears to be very real, and they're being investigated at the highest levels. And my understanding is, my take on things is that the U.S. government seems incredibly disorganized. I mean, you're saying that they're airbrushing UFOs out in Building 8 in NASA, and meanwhile, the Department of Defense is scrambling to figure out what photos or video they may or may not have, buried in decades of computers. So.
Yeah, and they have that dichotomy that's introduced by the secret versus the open, don't you? Because the government isn't necessarily privy to the truth, is it? The government also works on a need-to-know basis, I'm sure, as far as the military and intelligence are concerned. And also, I mean, NASA is a military organization. It's not a civilian organization. All these benefits go to the military first, and they launch military satellites, and so yeah, none of this has ever been for civilian benefit in the first instance. Obviously, we get bleed down technologies, etc. But I do think it's mainly psychopaths that are in charge of us, and they have some pretty psychopathic objectives, mainly focused around power and control.
Yeah. Well, so you'd seen at least this one craft. You said it was cigar shaped and it had two what appeared to be kind of like almost radar looking domes. And what did that remind you a little bit of David Fravor's report? He saw something underwater during the Nimitz UAP encounter. I think he described that as cigar shaped. You see any similarities there?
Yeah, definitely similar in the tubular, elongated shape. And it is, I mean, don't forget, old reports said that at least 50% of Americans believed in UFOs. And I think it's pretty similar in America, in Britain, and also believed that they were of extraterrestrial origin, or at least most or some of them. The popular belief being, it's the green man. So it is a good thing when the military apparently releases footage of unknown objects. And yeah, it's a good thing for ufology, because then the public do take it more seriously. But yeah, so yeah, the Nimitz stuff is really, really interesting. And obviously in the public's eye, it has great credibility because it's from a military source. But there's the other side of the coin that talks about, Werner von Braun, who was, the rocket scientist that we brought over in Operation Paperclip to America. Said to Carol Rosen, who's a longtime aerospace worker, worked with him for a few years, that what they're going to do one day is a fake alien attack using, electrogravitic craft or electromagnetic craft or advanced craft of some kind. So it can be a murky area, I mean, most sightings, they just see the craft. So no one knows who's flying it, why they're flying it, what their intention is, where it's come from. Is it ET? Is it Earth-based? Is it advanced technology?
Yeah.
No one knows.
Well, and like you'd said, there are so many stories, right, from so many different areas, and it's difficult or impossible to know who's telling the truth. I think the zeitgeist, as it were, the read that I kind of have is that pretty much everybody in the world right now feels like something is going on. And then, we've all figured that part out. And then beyond that, different people probably have varying levels of knowledge or belief in their own particular area,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. There's what's public, and there's how people interpret it as well, according to their own
yeah. So
experience.
it was only the one UFO that you'd seen then, and then there was or were there more?
No, that's the only photo. In fact, that was when I got caught.
Oh, okay.
The eureka moment was also the moment. That's when it all ended. I actually saw the guy's mouse pointer move across the screen and go down to the LAN icon on the bottom right next to your clock, and choose right click and then disconnect off the pop-up menu. Boom. And that was me. And I think, I'd got my time zones confused because I was in, a few different places. And either someone was awake at a late hour, or I was there, when people were actually meant to be working there during 9 to 5. So that's how I got caught eventually. Good methodological policing.
Yeah. Now, could I ask about this? You mentioned a spreadsheet containing lists of personnel that were assigned to it. They were assigned to ships, I think it said, right?
Yeah, there was one spreadsheet whose actual column title was non-terrestrial officers. That was the column title. And there was a list of names. I don't think there were ranks. I don't remember ranks. I'm pretty sure there weren't any. So the first thing I did was searched. In fact, that's interesting. What was the search engine then? I'm not sure what the search engine then was, but it wasn't Google. Non-terrestrial officers. And that was nowhere. And Google, you can use the search operators. You can write site:/.mil, which means it would only look at sites that end in .mil, or you can use .gov or .com or whichever extender you like in the domain. And then look for your search term. So it searched every military site that was indexable at the time, which was a lot of them. They've now gone to great pains to unindex their sites. And basically just, the power of the search engine to find any mention of it on any military site that wasn't on, or any gov site, or any, af.mil, the subdomains for the Air Force. So non-terrestrial officers wasn't a phrase at all then. I could find. That was in this spreadsheet. And, that could just mean guys 60 kilometers up in like near Earth orbit. That kind of non-terrestrial. They might be doing pressure and medical experiments, who knows? And I think that was on a Navy site. And by the way, when I say site, these weren't websites, these are private military networks. That took, some effort to find out their IP address range. It wasn't, well, it was publicly available in the end, but it's not something that came up easily.
It is interesting. It is interesting. And then, so, well, let me see. I wanted to actually, sorry, I'm just going through my questions. I wanted to ask about trust in government. I mentioned this earlier because I think that this is,
Did you just say trust in government in the same sentence?
Yeah, trust in government. I'm not even sure where to start with this, but I think that this is as important. It's not as specific to your story, but I think, again, you talked about kind of being a poster child for this. I mean, I don't know. What do you think about the actions overall of the U.S. government? And in your opinion, are they earning any amount of the trust that they expect from the public?
Well, we've got to remember the layers in this. It's not just the government, and the government changes, every few years. And the government's mainly composed of self-serving careerists who are on, short-termism, opportunism. That's what they're into. So we have to think about the long-lasting institutions, i.e., what underlies government, Department of Justice, the Air Force, the Army, NASA, military intelligence, domestic intelligence, foreign intelligence. As we do in Britain, you have your counterparts departments in America. I don't know all the names in America. So yeah, trust in government. I mean, to me, government is a buffer between the people and the real mechanisms of the state. And every state is an organism that wants to survive. And unfortunately, since they seem to be staffed by psychopaths, or at least, at the very least, sociopaths in the main, they're kind of like very scared, insecure animals that are really trying really hard to look after themselves and not give anything to anyone else, and in fact take stuff from other people if they can. So I think the government's like, it's sugar on the salt. It's just there to make people think, oh yes, I'm with this side, or I'm with that side, and that's who I identify with, and these are the issues that are important to me, and this is the government that's going to get things done. But yeah, as I said earlier, we just find the same agenda, which is more control over people and less freedom for people and less privacy for people, getting further and further, regardless of if it's left or right in power. So it doesn't matter who's in power.
Well,
so it's a bit dark and negative, but
no, it's I think it's so important, and it's probably, I mean, it's definitely a longer topic for another another day. But one of the things that I remember is my mother has told me this for years, that the pivotal moment for her was Gary Powers in the U-2 incident. I think that was the 1950s, right? That was back in the 50s. And
was he the crash pilot?
He was the one. Yeah, he was flying. He was doing reconnaissance flights over Russia, if I remember right. And the Russians captured him. They shot him down and captured him. And my mother had said, Eisenhower lied to us, and that was the moment that I realized the government could lie. I'm like, okay, well,
oh wow.
So you fast forward from there, and we've had Nixon, questions about WMDs in Iraq.
Read my lips.
Yeah, and so again, this is one of those really large issues, because I think when people lose their trust in these public institutions, I don't know, that seems like that's the beginning of the end to me.
Well, yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we're part of the way on that road now, aren't we?
Yeah,
the trust loss, absolutely.
Well, how do you feel about the British government's handling of this? Did they do enough for you as a citizen? Could they have done more?
Well, obviously in the end they did. But I was lucky that with the Asperger's, I was on television once during all of this, and the guy was asking me, why I did it. It was a big news station, ITV news station in Britain, and I was banging on about the untruthfulness and untrustworthiness of not just the US government, but the British government and UFO secrecy in general. And he was like, well, how can you should be trying to protect yourself and be humble at this point in time, not still sending the same message of my ideas of government, my negative ideas about government. And someone wrote in and said, he has Asperger's, he's on that trail of truth and he won't get off, no matter what happens to him. Like this, I guess it's a bit OCD. It's weird. It's not being nice being suddenly diagnosed with a mental illness. I don't think it's actually a mental illness. It's on the autism spectrum. So you have, it can affect you very, very differently depending on where you are on the spectrum.
And that's my. Yes, that's very real. It's a very real diagnosis.
Not in America anymore. They've banned the word Asperger's. It's not a thing in America for quite a few years. Since shortly after my case, weirdly enough. So
yeah, and it also fault. Can be related to savant abilities. I met a little boy at my ex-wife's preschool. And he had just been diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum, and he exhibited all of the classic symptoms of it. But one of the things that she had mentioned was he had gone through their geography books and memorized all of the state capitals, world capitals, capital cities.
Whoa.
And so I asked him a few really remote ones, right? Like, what's the capital of Mongolia? He would tell me. I said, oh, okay. So he's, so is this a savant ability? So on just as a thought, I was like, okay, why don't I try this? I wrote down pi to, I think, 24 places.
You
I said,
tester.
yeah, and I said, well, he was really friendly, really friendly young guy, but definitely
Yeah.
classic, Asperger's syndrome. And I said, how many of these do you think you could memorize? I said, just give it a try and let me know. So let him have it for about 5 minutes. So 20 minutes later, he was able to recite all of them. So
Wow.
I said hi to him the next day, and he could still recite all of them.
Oh no,
Right.
you put that in his head for life.
So,
Another
you
thing
know,
I know.
yeah, it's,
Yeah.
and perseveration, right, was a part of that. I mean, the way that he was able to memorize all of those capitals was by perseverating on it. He focused on it and internalized those. So,
Yeah.
with your quest, it seems like it would be very similar.
I saw a documentary on autism once in the UK. And this young guy, he looked at, I think it was Westminster Cathedral, which is a really old, intricate building. And then he just drew it. And he literally just looked at it, not for very long at all.
Yeah.
And he drew and it was in 3D, full perspective, all the little gargoyles and knobbles and intricate stuff. And you just think, my God, we have so much potential. Unfortunately, this guy couldn't cross the road on his own. So he was
Yes.
lacking in certain, basic sensory awareness skills, but he could do this magic with his eyes and a pencil. And it's absolutely incredible. So wouldn't it be amazing if we could find some way to be able to, cross the road and be a mental genius? It's
Yeah.
all in there, I guess, somewhere.
Yeah, it is. And I've been reading about this word neurodivergence, I guess, that
Oh
I think
yeah.
that's a newer phrase, neurodivergent. And it seems like the general public is just starting to wake up to this idea that we're not all alike, the way that we think, the way that we, focus on things. And there are different ways of looking at things. And the autistic spectrum is one aspect of it. There are other aspects as well. So
Yeah, but isn't that funny that that's almost a typical arc of what a parent teaches a child? Everyone's different. And
yeah.
this is humanity as a growing child. Oh my God, it's like a mental awareness now, a global mental awareness.
Well, can I ask, so did MI6 ever interview you about what you saw? Did I or maybe, I'm sure they just probably read the reports, or maybe they didn't even take it seriously. So
No, yeah, I'm sure MI6 were probably laughing. MI6 were probably already in the American networks, them having had blank passwords. I'm sure it wasn't, well, I know it wasn't the first. There were, but there was a permanent tendency of foreign hackers. You could do
well,
a net start command while you were there. You could see connections from all sorts of other countries. So I think MI6 probably thought, oh, we won't employ him. He got caught.
I see. Okay, yeah, so it's possible there were folks from all over the place.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the blank passwords, literally no password, just blank. I wrote a script in the Perl language, program extraction reporting language. It's got a couple of different names or what the P stands for, but yeah, it could scan really quickly for blank passwords.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just a total lack of security.
Well, I do remember, I like yourself, I'm an IT professional by training, and I do remember back in the 90s, it was, I mean, before that, hacking was a joke, right? There was Kevin Mitnick. He was one of the first big cases where they said, okay, it seemed like the early 90s, especially the government decided to take a hard stand.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? I think that they saw, e-commerce coming, they saw digital identity coming. They were looking at all of these things saying, we have to tighten this up. Back in the 80s, it was a joke, right? Some kid hacks into something and it was like, okay, you're in trouble. Don't do it again. And I do remember in the 90s, they started to, I remember seeing stuff like, okay, no, hacking is bad, really serious this time.
Mm.
That was kind of the message. It's like, no, this time we're serious. Don't do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, great observation. Yeah, in the 80s we had, phone phreaking, and that guy famously used some kind of noise making tube from a cereal packet.
Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch and the blue boxing tone. Yeah. And getting control of PBXs and so yeah, that is what I'd grown up with. We had BBSs in Britain as well before there was the internet. Little dial-up communities, text only. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It evolved from that kind of cheeky young troublemakers playing with phone exchanges to what we have now, which is
and I think that was one of the challenges back then. So when people say hacking, I think it's important for people to remember hacking was not the same back then as it was today. It was something where within the government there was this big effort to, okay, we need to take this more seriously because we're putting more important stuff into computer networks and it's all connected with the internet now. But for the general public, it was kind of, computers were still largely a toy, and it was like,
yeah. And also the government was very naive about that as well. For instance, the only reason I was able to penetrate the networks I did was because the government or the military or whoever, the purchasing department, bought publicly addressable IP addresses. And as you know, as an IT professional, you've got your public internet addresses, which are routable all over the web, www.com.co.uk, whatever. But you've also got what's called your private address space, your 192.168.172.10.10, whatever. And they're not addressable over the internet. So you use those for your private network. So there is another layer of isolation from the outside. The military didn't do that. I'd start off by connecting to ones that were on the public side, and my hope was to get through to more private ones and find out more information. But yeah, in the main, they bought public IP addresses, which is a huge mistake and cost them a lot of money. They'd buy like a Class B address, 65,000 addresses, which was a lot of money.
Yeah. I think,
don't know who was in charge of that. I think probably DISA, Defense Information Systems Agency.
Back then, I think everyone was kind of in learning mode, right? Even the experts were learning new things, on a daily basis, and the technology was changing so rapidly. Also,
yeah,
right?
Good point.
I think it was difficult for people to keep up. So,
yeah, big time.
Well, Gary, let me close by thanking you so much for your time. I mean, from what you've told me, you found the evidence that you started looking for back in 2001, but it has come at great personal cost. So I guess I should close by asking, do you have any regrets? And have you been able to find peace and emotional closure after all this time?
Well, let's not forget, I broke the law in the first instance. So I did expect some kind of punishment. But in my country, it would have only been 6 months in jail. And I do think their need on the DOJ side, their need for publicity and to get funding to combat cyber intrusions, they did, sex it up, for want of a better phrase. Apologies, Dr. David Kelly. But the worst thing was seeing it affect your family. My mum, my stepdad, my dad, my stepmom. And worst of all, because it went on for so long, really, it's bad enough worrying about 70 years in a foreign jail, but for it to go on for nearly 11 years was the worst thing. I don't think it should have got so blown up as it was. I would have gladly done my time in this country, even if it was longer than 6 months. But thankfully, in the end, I think common sense won.
Yeah.
Which is quite rare these days, or even in those days, 20 years ago. In fact, it was the anniversary a couple of days ago. So,
yeah. So it's been over 20 years. Over 20 years.
Yeah, we won the case in October the 16th, 2012. So exactly 20 years, a couple of days ago.
Yeah. Well, so 10 years from the case and then 20 years from the event, I think. So,
yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. 10 years from the victory of the case and 20 years in the event. Yeah.
Yeah. Gary, thank you again so much, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Love your channel. Love what you're doing with APAC and exotic propulsion and all your interviews. And yeah, thanks for inviting me, man.
Thanks again.